Good morning, everyone. For those of you I haven't met yet, haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Lynn Gidluck, and I have the unique role at the University of Regina of leading the Community Engagement and Research Center. In this capacity, I get to work with amazing community leaders that do so much with so little. And I have the opportunity to work with faculty, staff, and students at the University of Regina that want to share their talent and their time working in partnership with community to address some of society's most challenging issues. Essentially, I tell people when they ask me what I do that I'm kind of like a matchmaker, helping to connect like-minded people from the community with people working at the university. Or another way of looking at it is I serve as the university's community helpline, the first place you can call for anything related to community engagement, whether you work on or off campus. And it's a great job because I get to meet and work with people who are passionate about making the communities they live in or identify with better through the work they do. Like many of you, I feel like I'm in constant begging mode, searching for ways to expand our programming and impact in the community in the face of shrinking budgets. And that's why I was delighted when the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation so enthusiastically agreed to help sponsor and organize our Toolkit workshop series. And today is the first one in an exciting year of professional development opportunities that we've got lined up for you all. If you're not already on our mailing list, please feel free to pop your name in the email chat, and we'll make sure we alert you to other opportunities coming up this year. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Donna Ziegler. Donna, can you give a little bit of a wave for everyone? Donna is going to be moderating our panel today. She's the executive director of the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation. She started in this role in 2018 after working in the charitable and nonprofit sector. And as some of you will remember her as an elected school board member for more than 2 decades. If you're looking for a great way to network with people working in the nonprofit sector, to find potential partners, to learn about funding opportunities and other things to benefit the organizations you work for or volunteer for, consider joining the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation's Vital Signs Community Network. Whenever I have the chance to attend one of the meetings that Donna and her team organize, I always go away with new knowledge and connections that help me in the work that I'm doing. I'll pop a link in the chat with more information in a few moments. Now, I'm privileged today to introduce you also to Steve McLellan. I first met Steve when he was leading Tourism Regina. I was working at Casino Regina at the time. This was there was a time when the trial of Louis Riel lost its core funding, and this important attraction was in danger of folding. I was delighted to work with Steve to mobilize the community through a successful fundraiser and awareness campaign. And every summer since then, when I see posters for the trial of Louis Riel, I think of Steve and his amazing partnership making abilities and enthusiasm for community. So thank you, Steve, for all you've done. He went from Tourism Regina to the Chamber of Commerce, where he served as their CEO until just recently. Now, Bonnie Morton worked for much of her career with the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry as a tireless advocate for some of our city's most vulnerable people. And, Bonnie's never failing sense of optimism, compassion, and humor in the face of often overwhelming challenges has served as an inspiration to anyone who has had the privilege of working with her. So thank you for joining us, Bonnie. It was Bonnie that recommended that we round our panel out today with Pam Bellanger. It's only just recently that I had a chance to meet Bonnie, but in the words are Pam, and in the words of Bonnie, those who know Pam know that she's a caring advocate for the folks she works with and is passionate about the justice work that she has for her staff. Pam is going to be joining us a little late because she's got another event that she has to take part in today. Now, I'm just going to, before I just quickly turn things over to Donna, I'd like to acknowledge that the Community Engagement and Research Center and the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation have the privilege of being located in Treaty 4 territory. Many of my Indigenous friends lately have been telling me that they're starting to get really irritated by these land acknowledgements, that they're just hollow words unless they're followed with solid action towards reconciliation. And actually, just last night, one of the members of our advisory board challenged me, saying, we can and we should do better. and that words without action mean nothing. So that's the thought that I'm leading in. And I know many of you are grappling with the same challenge, as we go, as we mark Friday as, National Truth and Reconciliation Day and well into the future. So now I'm just so pleased to pass the mic over to Donna Ziegler, who will get us started.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn. I hope everybody can hear me. And thank you for all the work that you do, Lynn, in this sector, in this area, and today providing opportunities for us to learn from other professionals that have had careers in the nonprofit area, from their experiences and their expertise. So thank you very much for all the work that you do. Good morning, everyone. I can see a few faces around my screen, and it's wonderful to be here to discuss a topic that really is quite insightful and forward-thinking, using the experience, the years of experience and knowledge of our panelists in their past and current positions, maybe it's retired, so that they can reflect and reveal the secret nuggets that they have learned or captured during their time that they've been working and sharing with us. So today, we really want to learn about their past, what impact they've seen in their journey, and to help us even figure out our journey, continuing to move forward, and our commitment in this sector. And what things might we be overlooking or taking advantage of that, maybe we don't see it in the same light, and we can better acknowledge and enrich our own work life so that it's more satisfying. And wow, the knowledge, I know I've learned about both of these individuals. One I know a little bit more, but really excited to learn about their experience and their knowledge in the nonprofit sector. So this is how this panel discussion is going to work. I'll provide a series of questions to the panelists, and they'll share their stories, experiences, expertise, and personal reflections with us. We've allowed about 15, 20 minutes per question. So each will have almost, 7 to 9 minutes to respond to the questions until Pam gets here. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will answer those or get to those in the latter part of the discussion. And feel free also to use some of your buttons if you like, the happy face or the thumbs up. Feel free to use those to encourage our panelists. I think we'll probably be very close on time, so let's get started. So the first question, we don't often start with the exact career choice in mind. When I was much, much younger, I had hoped to be a lawyer. I became an advocate, which is really the French word for lawyer, but nowhere close to it. But today I'm working with donors and community to improve the well-being of our community members. It's not exactly a lawyer, but it's very satisfying. I started volunteering in my teens. I sprinkled volunteer activities throughout my career. I was a big sister for a while. I assisted with United Way campaigns, many others, until my mid-30s. Then I became more involved in charitable activities for causes that I really cared deeply about. I knew I was drawn to help others even more at that point. I had a family and knew that this is an area that I wanted to focus on. I knew also where I found that spark and where I found that hope and where I thought I could make a difference. Volunteering or working in the nonprofit sector, we're always short of resources, but we always want to do more. For me, the charitable work made my brain work in different ways. You became more creative. You could problem solve without a lot of red tape or multiple levels of approval. I learned some of my best skills being able to wear so many hats with nonprofits and charities, either working at the welcome tent for donors, learning about customer service, ordering food for hundreds of volunteers, overseeing security and learning about risks, reading a balance sheet, learning about Robert's Rules of Order and what good governance actually is, learning about CRA rules and charitable receipts. There was always something to learn and ways that you could help others and provide some of that hope back to community. I started with the federal government, then the provincial, then national media, then a local charity. The journey and experiences that I had took me to where I am today, which continues to serve the community and be involved in helping others. So there always be challenges. Why start in this sector? Why stick with it? I'll ask each of our panelists to share your winding journey, how you ended up with your career. Why did you choose to remain in the sector? Let's start with Bonnie. I'll pass it over to you.
Okay. All right. I grew up mostly in poverty throughout my life. When I landed up in Regina when I was in my early 20s, and this was during the Grant Divine times. I found that I was struggling and I didn't know where to go. And I had a social worker who was fresh out of university, who honestly believed that his job was to take me from here to get me out to the other end and hopefully never have to come back onto the system. When I was in public and high school, I failed greatly and never knew why. I was just told that I was lazy, I was stupid, literally told I was stupid. And I was also told that I was on one of two lists in our school. One was the list most likely to succeed, or the list that wouldn't succeed. And my guidance counselor made it very clear that I was on the last list. So I figured they knew better than I did, so I just quit trying. I had a social worker who wouldn't let me quit trying and offered me the opportunity to go to school, so I took it. I started out at a grade 5 level, but very quickly I started failing at that. And I wasn't at a grade 5 level, but this social worker also got me money to pay for a tutor to help bring me up to a grade 5 reading level. So even though I started failing again, he pushed me to make sure that I went and I had all kinds of tests. Turns out I'm dyslexic. And this is why throughout my life, I had continually failed and nobody had ever identified it. And I was in my mid-30s by this time. And he found the money. And this was at a time when social workers still had discretionary powers. And he was able to find the money to find somebody, and he found this person to teach me how to be functionally dyslexic, or I wouldn't be here today because I would have just continued failing. But at that time, the social service system had programming in place that would help to move you forward. So it was through that assistance that I was able to move forward. I looked at and Donna, I was thinking that I was going to become a lawyer because I definitely like to challenge things. And when I was still on social assistance, the government took our bus pass away from us, and we fought, and I ended up being the advocate for everybody. I didn't even know what an advocate was. All I knew is this wasn't fair and we had to fight it. And at that time we had 4 welfare schools here in Regina, and we fought it. We won part of it back for families that had to take kids to daycares and to school and that. And we got it back for people who had medical reasons. Shortly after that, Bob Lyons heard about me, and he was the MLA for Rosemont constituency, and had me volunteer out there. And some of you may know Miguel Sanchez, who was the other worker out there, and I worked with them doing advocacy for people on welfare. Then I started university, into the School of Human Justice, and shortly after I got in there, Reverend Bob Gay had heard about the work I did and asked if I'd come work with him at what was the downtown chaplaincy at the time, and is now the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry. That was 35 years ago. And I just retired in January of this year. What has kept me there? Part of it is when I got here to Regina, some folks helped me and they wouldn't take any money or any form of paying back. They just said, pay it forward. And I realized very quickly paying forward meant to help others the way I had been assisted. So that's why I've actually stayed in this work. But I was also somebody that didn't have a voice, didn't have somebody to help defend me. I now had started to build some skills, and it was just my passion. I learned very quickly that law, I'd watched too many Matlock movies or too many lawyer movies to think that social justice was going to happen out of our courts. The law happens out of the courts, not justice. So I then started working with Peter Gilmer, and our ministry switched over to become known as the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry. And my work has been locally, provincially, I've worked federally, and also I've been at the international stage where we present cases against Canada. So my work has expanded well beyond what I ever thought, or I think even social services ever thought I'd be able to do with my life. But it would not, I would never change that for anything. And yes, we struggle for funds, but I think your passion is not all about money. It's also about what brings you peace in your heart. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bonnie. What a great story. And I think you're right about finding champions, right? Helping others and finding champions that will give them that leg up. And you're right about, of course, you're right, but passion too. I think many people that I can see even in the room, they're here because of their passion and to make a difference. So next, we're going to pass it over to Steve. Steve.
Thanks very much. I think the best thing I could do probably is to shut up and turn it back to Bonnie. I love your philosophy about social justice not happening in the courts. That happens on the streets or in the Legislative Assembly, we'd hope City Council perhaps. But thanks again for inviting me, Lynn, to be here, and to all of you for listening today. So I have just retired 7 months ago from the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce, but I'll go back to the earlier days. I finished high school in Yorkton, grew up in Prince Albert. And when I finished high school, I had blown out my knee. And so I wasn't working the first year. Not that the universities were clamoring to get me, I'll be honest, but nevertheless, I wasn't going anywhere I wasn't going anywhere and getting there fast, I think. But during that year off, I read the book Hotel. I got quite interested in that as an opportunity, and started cooking and thought, well, I'd be a grand hotel manager at some point. I thought that would be a great career. And that's the last sort of focused career thought I had in my life. I took the Sask Polytech, then Kelsey Campus Hotel Administration program, graduated 79, and then got into the restaurant side of it, not the hotel management side. And for 10 years, I was in restaurant management, Stage West, Bernstein's Bistro in Regina, you may recall. But for the most of the years, I was out at Kenosee Lake in a place called the Moosehead Inn, and I was a partner there. And I took all the marketing skills that I had, a bit of the what I call PR and BS skills that I developed, and they became very useful there. In '89, I got married, and I decided, instead of, we had a nightclub and a restaurant at Kenosee, instead of me being the solution to a problem at the front door of a restaurant or a nightclub, I wanted to be the problem. So I said, enough of that business. Okay, I never was the problem, but I wanted to be, I didn't want to have every time the phone rang, somebody saying to me, listen, you've got to come over because we're jammed up and somebody didn't show up. I wanted to get a different kind of lifestyle. Restaurants is very hard, very long hours. And I wasn't that old, but I was done with it. Got married in '89. We moved to Saskatoon, and I began work as the executive director of the Provincial Tourism Association, a group called TISASC. I was the lead of our local tourism association. So I had some affiliation with TISASC and became an office jockey, if you will, versus a restaurant manager. And for 8 years, it worked out exceptionally well. I got to see much more of the province and meet some great people. And we were an advocacy organization. We did a variety of things as well, but it was a great job, and we love living in Saskatoon. Then one day I got a call from the folks at Tourism Regina, who were looking for an executive director. I had a couple of conversations with them. A few weeks later, I had a job and I moved to Regina, and we raised our family here. I was at Tourism Regina for 8 years as well. And then one day, I was still happy there, enjoying the work, and I saw the ad for the CEO of the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce, which wasn't in restaurants or tourism anymore. And I looked at it and I said, this looks like an interesting opportunity. And then I spent 14 years there. And yeah, I loved it until, as I say, 7 months ago, my wife and I both retired. And it's a lot more fun in the first year of being retired than the last year of work. I can tell you that, as much as I enjoyed my work. And the couple of things I want to talk about at the Chamber that I think have a positive reflection to this. We used to use the terminology that we weren't a not-for-profit. That was a tax status. We were a not-for-loss. And one of the things that's important for nonprofits is to be able to build up some cash when you can, and to not, as often as you can, at least in the years that you can, not go hand to mouth as an organization. It's very, very tough to do anything out of the box when every nickel has been already spent. So I'm very conscious of that. And the terminology of not for loss, I think, is also important. And this is more about my career than the philosophy, so I'll get back to that in a second. But the Chamber had a very good philosophy in its strategic, its mission. It's Saskatchewan business, making Saskatchewan a better place to live, work, and invest. And live, we took heartily. Because if it's a lousy place to live, Saskatchewan, nobody will take a job here, nobody will want to invest here. So we spent a lot of time on issues like education, where I first met our moderator, because we knew the importance of that, and not only for families, but also for the individual students, and as well for the employers eventually, to get good people who could do great things for them. That whole live thing worked exceptionally well. And I don't say that particularly because it's more fitting with the sort of social commentary that my colleagues have referenced, but it's critical to business. And I think people think about a Chamber of Commerce as only interested in profits. And we know businesses to survive had to have profits, but we also knew that in order to get there, the fundamental was place to live. And that's, where are my kids going? Are they well looked after at school? Do they have daycare? That's important. All those issues, even healthcare and local chambers, we worked with them over the years on recruitment of doctors, because it's very hard to get somebody to move to Humboldt to take a job or to invest in a business if they have unique medical needs, or they realize there's simply no doctors around. So businesses are very focused on, we were very focused on those issues of making Saskatchewan a great place to live and helping those that we could with that effort. And from that foundation, we knew that people would move here and invest here and so on. So I reference that because I think it's a perception that's important to recognize, and one that I particularly, but all of our staff and our board over the years at the Chamber, drove home heartily. So I'm now retired. I do a few things with some volunteer groups, but mostly enjoying life and cutting grass, it seems. I'd leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, you know, I really appreciate some of the wording that you use, like not for loss. I haven't thought of it that way, but I do appreciate that. And, you know, I do also agree, and I think many here would agree, that social is critical to business. When you mentioned all the other areas that were so important so that we could get people here towards improving the economy, those critical pieces of housing, education, almost like the determinants of health on a different level, are critical to improving the wealth of a province as well. So, and thank you for all the work that you did with the Chamber of Commerce. But yeah, I've really appreciated that insight. We're going to move to the next question. I'd ask that you share some impact from the work you were doing. Maybe you didn't always understand the impact that the work you were doing had at the time, or why it was, why it really mattered, and you didn't see that until later. So let's talk about maybe the understanding of impact and the work that you did. I know when I was a volunteer with Big Brothers Big Sisters on the Big Sister side, I didn't know that my little sister saw me as this great mentor. And I don't see myself as that at all. But when you're looking in the, from the eyes of a 14-year-old, and I connected with her many years later through Facebook, and she talked about my actions, my values, the words I used, that that made a difference for her. I couldn't even tell you what I said, but sometimes we don't understand the impact that we might have on others. Even when I was with the Canadian Cancer Society and I was advocating for changing bylaws and laws and policies around preventing cancer, these laws I recognize now will have lifelong effects for people after us. So sometimes we don't always know when we're making decisions or involved with organizations, the impact that we're making. Share with us a story, an experience, something that you believe you didn't know at the time maybe had some impact, but you see now the critical impact that it has, and how the work that you did or the organization that you belonged with was able to make that impact. And this time we will start with Steve.
All right, thank you. So two things. One is it's similar to your big sister experience. Years ago, my son and I were involved with the Scouts Canada. And long story short, we're out at a camp at Rowan's Ravine, and these 11, 12-year-old boys are playing chicken with knives. They're throwing them at each other's feet. They had runners on, and that's exactly my reaction. I went, "Oh, this is fabulous, great." Okay, that wasn't the reaction, but we certainly took they weren't to have knives, and we took the knife away, and so on. Nobody got hurt, thankfully. But we have in the scouting world, there was a thing called the honor circle, and what it means is instead of us as the leaders saying you get a timeout or you're going home or whatever the case is, we brought the boys around a circle and said, you determine this is wrong. You know it's wrong. Yes, lots of nods. You determine what the penalty is for those that were playing it. And I don't recall the exact of their determination of the penalty, but the kid who was the most actively engaged and was a bit of a troublemaker, but he's probably a billionaire now, was the one who came up, and several others too. They came up with really good ideas on how to deal with it. And the reason I reference this isn't about knives or whatever, but the kinds of things that we had been teaching them as I won't say potential penalties, but deterrence, they were very clear on, and they had heard what we said. Yes, they went outside of the bounds in this one, but we sat there as adult leaders and said, my golly, that was terribly impressive. They did better than we would have in terms of determining what those kids should have done or what their penalty, if you will, was. So the point I reference there is that we wouldn't have bet in advance of that day that those kids would have done so well, but they did. They were listening. It sunk in, and I think that's a testament to both the kids, of course, but also the rest of the leaders who were consistent in terms of their messaging to these kids and the honor that, in this case, Scouts brought. So I think never assume people are not listening, kids or clients, or that's important because it does make a difference. And I've seen it time and time again. Another program, I'll flip to the chamber now, a program that we launched just before COVID. And like many things, it took a bit of a different trail after that, but nevertheless, still important. We found that a lot of businesses said, listen, for example, we would say to them, it's around Indigenous engagement. And we would ask them, we say, do you have Indigenous workers? And they would say, we tried that once, and here's what happened, and we didn't know what to do. And we said, what about engagement with the community? Well, we're concerned we don't want to look silly or embarrass the community. We don't want to do it wrong because it's a very sensitive issue now. We didn't know what to do. So you know what we're doing? Nothing. So time and time again, we heard that from businesses across the province, large and small. And in fairness, some businesses were doing exceptional things. But we created a program we called the Indigenous Charter. And I have a paddle here that some of you can see. You might be able to see the logo there. And I encourage all of you as nonprofits or any private sector that are on, it's open to all, where you can go onto the SaskatchewanChamber.com site and have a look at the material. And in essence, and the reason we use the paddle is the reality of doing this is first to learn a little bit about it. So we said you've got to take some Indigenous engagement training, and Indigenous people generally will be very supportive of your efforts if they know that they're heartfelt and that you're working in the right direction. The significance of the paddle is that we also knew that there couldn't be one person in a business of 100 employees that was focused on this and nobody else was. And we used the analogy of the paddle, which was an idea that I'd had in a previous iteration earlier on in my career. But the idea of the paddle, if there's one person in a canoe that's paddling, but there's 100 people in it, 100 people in the employee base, one person only paddling, you go nowhere. You can't go in the direction you need to go. You're not getting there fast. It's confusing and wasteful of the time of the other 99. But if you teach them how to paddle, if you get everybody paddling in the same time in the same direction, away you go, and you'll do great things. And quite frankly, those 99 will enjoy the journey because they're learning how to do something and they're working together and so on. That's the analogy of the paddle and why it's the emblem of the program. But the point of it is that it made a difference to a lot of businesses. They said, okay, now we get it. We're okay to step into this theater of Indigenous engagement. We will talk to, we had a staff person, Nick Creighton, who began the leadership of the program. And there's another person in place with the chamber now leading it. But nevertheless, we said, listen, let's start with training. There's information on how to do engagement with the community, how to engage, retain Indigenous employees, all of those things that people said, I want to do it. I don't want to do it wrong. So if you can help me, teach me how to do it right, we'll go further. And I think we saw great success in it. We had lots of companies, dozens and dozens and dozens sign up as signatories. The program was self-sufficient from an investor perspective. The chamber didn't have to put a membership money in. Investors came forward. It demonstrated both the need and the support that was out there. And I think it's going to pay dividends for companies and individuals and Indigenous employees and companies as well. One of the other things we did out of this was it's a good thing to be intending to be supportive of Indigenous businesses. So when you go and buy whatever it might be, monitors or something else, or coffee or catered lunches or electrical work, it's a good thing to say, listen, I'd like to buy some of this from an Indigenous company, but I don't know who they are. And so we created an Indigenous supplier directory that's online, open to anybody to use. And I'd encourage each of you to say, well, listen, we don't buy much electrical service, but you might buy strategic planning advice and this sort of thing. Utilize that resource that's online. So we taught companies how to do it. We put a list together of companies who could supply things, Indigenous owned companies. And I think it'll make a difference for a long time. And even if we only really make a difference to 10 Indigenous employees or business owners and truly long-term help 5 or 10 businesses, I would consider it a huge success. And I know that we've gone right through the roof with companies that have been better because of it. And those companies, again, that were hesitant, they said, okay, you've given me permission to take a step into this theater, if you will. And they saw great success, and they just needed to be invited in. And Nick, who was an Indigenous person, was very patient and very well informed, and did an exceptional job of making these people feel that they could be part of it. He had a good sense of humor, which helped, but also lots of core materials that are there. And again, I am not advertising for the chamber any longer, but I'd encourage all of you to have a look at the Saskatchewan Chamber information, because if it's useful to you, fantastic. And more importantly than anything, whether you get your information from the chamber or not, make it a significant part of your efforts, not just a part of somebody's desk. Make it a significant part of your efforts, and you'll be better for it, and so will the broader community. I'd leave it at that, but it's a program I'm very proud of.
Sorry, thank you, Steve. Lost my mouse there. Thanks so much for that. Lots of really good pieces of information there around never assume that people aren't listening to what you're saying and how far they might take it. I really appreciate the paddle and the understanding of the paddle, and just trying to take this initiative on and work through it, and being involved in it as a partnership, as a group, and walking that journey together with the Indigenous Charter. So thank you very much for that. We're going to move it over to Bonnie.
Okay. I had kind of thought a little differently about impact, and when I first noticed it, and I'd have to say my first notice of any impact on the work that I did was my very first piece of advocacy work around transportation that was being taken away from us as students. Part of it was I didn't realize the impact at the time. It was like, ooh, I partially won, or I won. But then later you would realize what the impacts were. Through doing the work that I did individual advocacy and systemic advocacy. And so what I'm going to do is talk about the impacts on that. We don't usually see a lot of the folks that we did advocacy for coming back to us. I mean, we have the odd returned client and stuff like that, but normally we could deal with an issue for them, and if they went away, we may never hear from them. That was the case of this one woman, and it was an Indigenous lady, and social services was going to kick her and her family off of social assistance because they said they weren't getting and maintaining employment. And this is when we started seeing some of the services like I was able to benefit from sort of disappearing or going a little bit on the wayside. Instead of moving people into it to assist them, they were moving more towards work. It didn't matter that they would just be in a revolving cycle of poverty because they didn't have the ability to move forward. So we fought through appeals and everything else, and we were able to get this woman and her family to stay on socialist services, and we were able to get them to do assessments with her and her husband and put them into education. Once that was done, we didn't see her for, I'm going to say it was a good 10 years later, and I met her at a bus stop one day, and I knew, like, I'm not good with names, but I knew that I had met this woman before. And she stopped and she said, "You're Bonnie Morton, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "You may not remember me," she said, "but you helped me and my family." And then she talked about her and her family, her and her husband. They did their basic upgrading, they got it. Then they went into university, and they were at that time working down in the United States as Indigenous actors. And she informed me that through being able to help her and her husband move forward, her children seeing the value of education, and each and every one of them was either in university or a technical school, or they had completed and were out working. So the smallest thing you can do for somebody has an impact, and you may never know what that impact is. It might seem like a small impact to you, or it might seem like a small thing to you, but it means the world to the folks that you've helped them out. And it may mean the world to them, and it may be something huge towards their future direction. So that was on the advocacy, or the individual advocacy side. On the systemic advocacy side, I know we're talking here about how many of us don't have the funds for like educational things that could help us move forward and build stronger communities and stuff like that. I think we need to remember that we, as the community, we are our best partners. I started offering up doing advocacy training to women's shelters, to men's shelters and things like that, to disability organizations working on behalf of folks that are like on the SED program and stuff like that. In turn, these organizations have included the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry in educational things as well. One of our biggest supporters around educational opportunities has been labor. Believe it or not, labor can be one of our biggest partners. We did some advocacy training or just speaking at some of their events, and then they would include us in some of the training sessions they had for their people as well. This all builds us into a stronger community, but guess what? It also makes partnerships that last for a lifetime. So we were able to build, and the impact is, and I never realized it until I was just thinking about it as Steve was talking. The impact has been large just by offering 1 or 2 advocacy training sessions. And then you offer it to somebody else. On the national level, with organizations I volunteered with, I was the president of the National Anti-Poverty Organization, that's now Canada Without Poverty. And we would partner with large national organizations like unions and teachers federations and stuff like that. And when they would hold big conferences and gatherings, they'd invite us. And what we would do is we would dovetail on that with their permission, and we would hold our AGMs as national organizations of poor people. That's the only way we could do it. Those are strong partnerships, and we still have them today. And I joined well over 35 years ago with some of these organizations, and those partnerships are still strong. I had the opportunity of going to the United Nations in 2006. And when a federal government gave misinformation, oh hell, let's face it, he lied. I stood up and said he was lying, even though I was ruled out of order. But by doing that and by having that voice at that table, that committee then called me later to ask why I had said that. So we were able to hold Canada on the line for the fundings that they were taking away from national organizations that would help people living in poverty. Canada did not look good coming out the end of that meeting. So by having those voices there, we have an impact. So I've been able to, one voice can have an impact no matter where you're at. I've been asked to speak to teachers at the university, and I found a thank you card from them the other day. And it had all the nice stuff in it about how they had learned so much about some of the kids that were in their classes living in poverty, they'd now look differently on them and stuff like that. So just believe that every time you say something and you're doing it with passion and you're doing it at the betterment of another person, you have an impact across our whole society. That's it.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Great stories, both on the individual advocacy and the impact that you can have just standing up for somebody or supporting them. And then the systemic advocacy, around the partnerships. And I think about Steve's example of the Indigenous Charter. I don't know how much that cost, but the partnerships are the critical component to make to make some waves or move forward. And in nonprofit, partnerships are truly our friend, and working with others so that we can have more impact. At this time, I want to welcome Pam Bellanger. So thank you, Pam, for joining us. And maybe if it's okay with you, I'm just going to ask you to maybe jump in here a little. I don't know if you wanted to tell us a little bit about your journey on how you got to be where you are. And then just a little bit about the impact that you've been able to see in some of the work that you've done. So I'll pass it over to you. Please feel free to take a little bit of time, and
Okay.
we're glad that you could join us.
All right. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Pam Bellanger. I work at the Eagle Heart Center. I've been here for 10 years. And prior to that, I worked at the Welfare Rights Center for about 9 years before it closed. I believe that's where I first met Bonnie Morton years ago. Did advocacy there. I started out as family support worker there, graduated from the University of Regina in 2003 with a Bachelor of Social Work, and been working in the community ever since. I started out as family support at Eagle Heart Center, did the advocacy role, then the trusteeship. Then when that closed, I took a year off and came back to Eagle Heart Center, started off as the mentor. And for the last 7 years, I've been the team lead for the mentorship program. Recently added the housing support team as well. So managing, I believe, 7 team players and supervising the housing and adult mentoring program here at Eagle Heart Center. So yeah, it's a lot of advocacy, and I guess the most important role that I portray here is the advocacy with the Ministry of Social Services, and being able to navigate the, lower socioeconomic individuals that are, some aren't even getting benefits. First of all, they come in for housing and they have no benefits whatsoever. So they've been, either shut down from benefits from the ministry. A lot of them should be on SED, but they're sitting on SIS. Therefore, they don't have enough income to get housing. Housing has been a big thing for our agency in recent months, I guess you could say, for, since Camp Hope. We are participating in the Reaching Home Initiative for Homelessness, which started the old homeless program here. I've been with the adult mentoring program for the last 7 years, and we've always been, hidden homelessness within our program. And our mentors were already looking for housing for our individuals that are on our program. We have about 55 to 60 participants each month on our adult mentoring program. And housing, of course, is always an issue. We provide daily supports to adults with cognitive disabilities, such as FASD and or acquired brain injuries. So we have a network of, agencies, organizations that we work closely with throughout the city. In saying that, a lot of advocacy background. I've had Bonnie and Peter come out and do some advocacy training to my team a few years back, and just building those relationships and partners with, the organizations, and keeping on top of having to navigate the system for those that do not know how to do that. That's basically what my work entails on a daily basis. Am I missing anything?
No, unless you had any kind of an impact story you wanted to share, but certainly can feel your passion and really appreciate and the dedication and work that you do, for sure. Yeah. So
What?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the impact of, there's so much homelessness out there right now, and the SIS program having to, navigate that whole process. It's time consuming. My team could be double the size for all the walk-ins, the referrals. Our team is just way too small. The capacity isn't there, but, we try our best, and we continue to knock away at the homelessness issue in North Central, around Regina here, and begging for financial, the financial part from the ministry to be able to, provide more staff to tackle the whole situation, the crisis, the addictions, it's just horrendous here. And we're located right in North Central, right in the heart of the community. And so we have a lot of walk-ins, and every day is, a bustling day here, and we have somebody new every day, basically looking, for supports. We start right from the bottom. Basics. Did you eat today? Did you have water? Do you have clothing? Do you have shoes? And so we start right from the bottom up. And I've been working on trying to see if we can get our own housing for adult mentoring program. And there again, we are looking at funding to be able to open our own for our own program. I just came from the sod turning ceremony for Silver Sage. They're having, I think it's 24 units being built by next year for families. That's something that I dream of for our program here. So it's a long haul yet.
Thank you so much, Pam, for all that you've shared and the work that you guys do. And I believe I was at the same sod turning. Lots of really good work happening in that area. So moving to our next question. This is the critical one for all the people that are listening or going to listen to the recording that are just starting out in their career, or maybe they're midway, and they want to know, what you guys all know now. What do you wish you would have known earlier in your career? Lend us some little nuggets of advice that you give your younger self if you could go back in time. I think personally for me, it would be that I would have hoped to have figured out how to bridge some of these values that I have with my work earlier in my career. You know, whatever your values are, love for community or customer relations or finding resources or sharing wisdom or being grateful. Those that drive your practice, your work ethic and your hope. It will truly light up the fire inside of you once you find that, as we can hear by all our panelists. They're very passionate about what they do and did. You know, for us too, even at the, you know, I think also just not being afraid to, maybe for me personally, not being afraid to ask for what you need. When the community shut down March 16th of 2020, everybody was in a state of panic and not really knowing how our charities would all fare. And so the Community Foundation, we gathered our staff and our board and jumped into it and thought, what could we do? And we started the Emergency Response Fund for Community Need. We didn't know where it would go, and donors stepped up right away to help our community. So not being afraid, like you just spoke to, Pam, about asking for what you need. And, you know, earlier in our careers, where I believe a little bit more timid and shy. And once you begin down that passion road, you're not afraid to ask anymore. So sharing, yeah, those little nuggets of advice. And so I'm going to start with Bonnie.
There. My little pointer didn't want to do it on me. So anyway, I guess for me, I would suggest that you need to remember to take care of yourself. If you're not healthy, you really can't help other people. I found that a little bit late in my life, but you need to take care of yourself so it doesn't come back later to bite you. Don't be afraid to be flexible. It's like you heard both Donna and I saying, well, we had planned on being lawyers. Well, because of my continued failure in the past, I carried guilt about not moving forward with that and thought that I was copping out, when really what I was doing was I was actually living into my passion of doing this kind of work. Like I said, most lawyers couldn't, you know, on a daily basis, they wouldn't be able to do this kind of stuff. So don't blame yourself when you're moving forward on something, and don't be ashamed of it. And just don't be afraid of changing directions if that's what you need to do. Speaking to others to get some input and some guidance around it. I used to think, oh, if I depended on somebody else to tell me what to do and how to do it, that just means I'm so weak I can't figure it out myself. That's not what it is at all. We all need guidance. And it was through some of those discussions that people said to me I was heading in the right direction. But I learned all those lessons later in life, but don't follow those ways. Move forward. Like I said, where your passion is, where your heart is. And if you're in a job and all you're into it is for the paycheck, then you shouldn't be there. If that's all it means to you is money, because you don't do yourself any great service, and you sure don't do the people you're trying to work on behalf of any service either.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks for all those nuggets. The self-care, really critical. Honestly, as I think working in the nonprofit sector, your passion is there. And so you just go, go, go. You work till wee hours in the morning or whatever it takes to help others and to get the job done. So yes, self-care is critical. If you don't help yourself, then you're not going to be good for anybody else. And being flexible and asking for guidance and help. Very, yeah, good pointers for sure. I'm going to move over to Pam, if you can share what little nuggets you think you would have told your younger self that you wish you would have known.
So to begin with, you know what? I always wanted to be a nurse. When I was doing my high school, I said, I want to be a nurse. I don't know, somewhere along the line of university classes, I changed over to social work. And I think part of that is, you know, the values instilled in my family system, having to, help people, and just being committed to, and a helping hand, I guess, in a sort of sense. And like Bonnie said, always being flexible in terms of knowing that change is inevitable, and, being able to work off of that. And some of the other things would be throughout my, time, community values. I wish I would have embedded more cultural components to my work. When I was in university, for example, I was taking Cree classes. I wish I would have continued with that. Being able to carry on the Aboriginal components of values and so forth within my work. And I see a lot of that. I think a lot of the people today in the Aboriginal community are lost, have lost connection to the, Aboriginal values, etc. And some other pieces of advice, I guess, of course, is not to be afraid to ask for what you want. I mean, I when I started work, I was really shy, and the presentations at the university classes were, did some good. When I came to Eagle Heart Center, I have to be grateful for Delora here as the executive director. I mean, she's probably the one I can thank for, making me have a voice. For example, throwing me out there and making me do as team leads do, doing speeches and whatnot. So now I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to ask anymore. I'm the beggar here now. And we're doing our walk on Friday for Every Child Matters, and Delora's on vacation. So, I've been dealing with the media this week. I asking and begging for shoes for our walk. And so it's been a very good experience working with Delora, and she's, kind of my mentor too, and, really helped me with growth in the working field. And of course, the last thing I guess would be love your work. You're right. You have to love your work and to be able to be there, not for the dollars, but for the compassion and the passion you put into your work, and being able to understand that you're doing it because you love doing the work and not for the money. So, and I think that's it.
Oh, that's lots. That is lots. I've heard values a lot too, going back to what our values are, and adding that to our work. And, you talked about adding cultural components in the beginning. I think the world is changing where we can do that in a more open way. So, and not being afraid to ask for what you want. And, you mentioned, asking, finding your voice and being passionate about it. And I know with the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation, we've started a Truth and Reconciliation Fund, and I am passionate to get dollars to that fund. So like you, I will be out begging and pounding the pavement, looking, for dollars to match that fund so we can make more difference in community, and getting involved in the truth and the reconciliation side. You can tell that these panelists love their work, and they're very passionate about it. So I am next going to ask Steve to share the nuggets that he would like to pass on to his younger self, and what he wishes he would have known then that he actually knows now.
Thank you. I'm going to take a little more practical. I've made notes and give my fellow panelists credit for the work that they've done and the points that they've raised. But some are a little more practical minded too, for those that are in the audience, if you will. One of them is don't chase this shiny object. If you're in a nonprofit, there's always something. Now, that doesn't mean that don't go to the front counter and help the person who doesn't have shoes, as Pam has referenced. But in the government grant world, there can always be a new grant, or somebody in government who's paid to promote it, wants you to get very involved with them. Be cautious of that. And even from an advocacy perspective at the chamber world, we would say, yep, that's a business issue, but we can't chase that one now because we wouldn't do justice to the ones that we have. So be cautious of that. And that also ties to a point I'll have, well, I'll use it now, is having a strategic plan. As a staff person, you can be sent into a million directions. If you don't have a plan that protects you, from gives you focus, that your board has developed with you, you're going to be shooting at stars, and that's real hard to work and be productive in. And the important thing of a strategic plan also is only plan it so that you have about 80% of your staff capacity detailed there. And the reason that you want that 20 is because there are going to be needs or realities or opportunities that come forward that you say we can do it, but 80% of our focus is still we know what we're going to be working on for the next year. The other thing I'll reference, and it's been brought up several times here, is the peer groups. Within the city, on one hand, and you heard the example today, were two community organizations, the foundation and Pam's group, went to celebrate the opening, the sod turning of another similar but different organization who have the same global goals. Get to know who those groups are, get to know who those individuals are, and away you go. Also create relations with those local peers, because as we heard earlier, one of them may be doing a training session and they have 4 extra seats, and they'll invite you if they know that you're interested, and of course feeding that back. And it could be extra seats at a training session, it could be an excess of foolscap or photocopy paper, or it might be somebody who you pitched a opportunity to as a sponsor, and they said, you know, we're really not into what you're selling, but we're focused on kids in sport. And so you go back to your peers who are in kids in sport and say, listen, let me introduce you to this person, and that will come back to benefit not only the kid who wants to get into sport, but you in other ways. Another very boring but very important session recommendation is know your bylaws. We have a line in a training program that the chamber used that no executive director ever got fired for following the bylaws. And I have been in organizations and more recently seen organizations who hit the ditch hard because they didn't follow their bylaws. And so get to know them. We have a saying that I coined because I'm a terrible poet. It's hooray, hooray, it's the 1st of May, time to read your bylaws day. And the same with October. Every 6 months, read your bylaws, because you know you'll do reviews of them and you'll watch them when something hits the ditch, but you've got to be able to know what they are, and you're serving your organization well, staff or executive director. Here's the other thing, always hire the very best staff that you can find, even if they're better than you. There's a great line that says 5s hire 4s and 8s hire 9s. Show how good you are by having people around you that are better than you. Don't be intimidated by a young student who's just a crackerjack. Don't be intimidated by somebody who's got more credentials than you. Hire the best people that you can, and the resulting reflection positively on you will be significant. The other one is be proactive with your board searches. I've had 33 different boards in my career with nonprofits. I should have been more proactive getting people, not my friends who would agree with me. In many cases, it should be people that I know a little and I know their skill, but I should have been more proactive in getting the right people who not sit on a board, but serve on a board. Get those people, because that makes your life so much easier. No resume builders that they're only there to pad their own resume. They can do that, but they have to do the work as well. So be proactive. The other one is this, and this is something in the chamber world, there's about 40 local chambers, and I had to kick them and a little to get them to do this. When they do an event or a project, I said, what's the first line on expenses? And they go, well, it'll be whatever, the banquet room or something. I said, no. First line is profit for you. If you don't do it for a profit, doesn't have to be $1 million, doesn't have to be 100%, but if you don't do it as a profit and take that money to do some of the other 80% of your strategic plan, you shouldn't do it. Sometimes that profit gets scrunched as the project goes along, but start when you're doing an event particularly, that the first line is we're going to make 10% or 15% profit, and work hard to keep that in place. If you do those things, following your bylaws, creating your peer groups and so on, and getting to know each other, you will have much better success in terms of the things that you do. A line that I coined in the tourism world, when I'd sit at a table of my peers from like tourism. Regina was where I worked, and I'd sit with the Tourism Vancouver and Tourism Montreal people. At first I thought, I got nothing in common with these guys. Then I realized I have everything in common. The only thing that separates us is decimal points and postal codes. They have challenges with their city council. They have underfunding issues. They have hoteliers that don't like this or don't like that, and attractions who don't get along with events. All of those things that I had to deal with, so does Montreal and so does Vancouver. They learn from us and we learn from them. So the only thing that separates you from any other group is decimal points and postal codes. Learn from them. They will learn from you. And getting to know your peers is absolutely critical and informative for everybody. I'd leave it at that.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Those are very practical and a lot of pieces that I have myself put into place. The one I wanted to mention out of all of them, and I agree, don't chase shiny things, because in the nonprofit world, we're doers. So we get involved in doing a lot of initiatives. And so being careful on what you choose to do and do it well. The one I wanted to just mention was the peer groups. To know your peer groups, this group here, the charitable sector, nonprofit sector, at the Community Foundation, we have our Vital Signs Community Network that Lynn mentioned at the very beginning. When I sat in on that group, what I learned was that there are a lot of charities around the table that do such good work. A lot of the time, we don't know what the other one is doing, and there is opportunities for people to connect, to share programs, to learn from other programs, to reference or send clients to other programs. So chatting amongst the charitable and nonprofit sector is really critical, because we're always trying to do more, of course, with less dollars. I agree with knowing your bylaws. And I like your being proactive with your board searches. You're right. Lots of times, because the board roles are volunteer, we're looking to fill those spots, but making sure those people are, willing to serve versus just sit is really critical. And, where I would agree that we're not always good at looking for the profit line in things. We will get things done. We will get work, our knowledge and experience out into community, but we're not very good at looking at that profit line, because we're interested in helping others as almost like our first priority, which you're right, profit is critical. Decimals, not postal codes. I love that, because you are right. We offer a lot in the city of Regina, the outskirts of Saskatchewan, that in rural Saskatchewan, we offer a lot to other communities that they can learn from. So thank you so much for all of our panelists and all the wisdom that you've shared, your experiences and your stories. And I think we've all, learned a thing or two that we can take and use in our next phase of our work, for sure. And it's a good way to reflect. Even when I was looking at the questions and reflecting on all of this, all of the areas, it, made me grateful for the path that I've taken and the path that I'm in. And rather than taking advantage of some of the pieces that happen, you're able to reflect and appreciate. So now I'm going to pass it back over to Lynn. So thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I can't help but think that I got a whole ton of great advice. I've been taking down notes like crazy. One that really resonated with me was the shiny penny, as I know I have 3 emails to respond to from people with opportunities to partner, which means projects that people want me to do. And so figuring out how that kind of leads back to that strategic planning. Again, thank you, Steve, for kind of that reminder of that, that you can only do so much, and then all of us are stretched to the maximum. But you got so many great pieces of advice from our panelists here. We'd like to open it up now for people in the audience to pose some questions, if you have any, or comments or reflections that you have after listening to this great group of people here. So do we have any brave souls out there that would like to just kind of, let's pretend we're in the Mama Waiting Center where we used to do these prior to COVID, where we could all be sitting around in a circle and asking questions. I know this Zoom world is really awkward and weird, but don't be shy. If there's anybody here that would like to, we've got some incredible people here to pose some questions to. Jump in if you have a chance. As we hear the crickets.
So one question I will ask the panelists, because I really liked the concept of it, but how, you say, don't chase the dollars and make sure you take care of yourself when you're in this work. I wondered if each panelist could just share one of the ways that they made sure they kept their boundaries, on, their bookends on each side, so that, you were able to do some self-care. And how did you do that self-care, or what did you do to make sure that you maintain that self-care? Because we can go down that rabbit hole and get really, really involved and forget to come up for air. So what, maybe, Bonnie, maybe just start with you, because you were the first one that mentioned it.
Well, I guess as soon as you start feeling a bit of stress, start seeking somebody to speak to share with and get some advice from. Like I said, my way of handling it was ignore it and stick my head into work. And that's not what you should be doing. So don't follow my example. But no, I ended up having to retire because of health issues getting in the way, heart problems, cancer problems, all of these things that later were said to me that it was all created by the stress that I've lived over the past number of years of my life. A lot of it has been the stress through work. And I have to say that stress has not been created by the folks that I worked with, but by the systems I had to try to contend with. So I never want anybody that I've worked with or on behalf of to think that they contributed in any way to my bad choices in my health, but I will blame it on the systems.
But, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, just seek help early. Don't wait till it's too late.
And Pam, what about you? Because you work in a very a busy atmosphere. You're helping multiple people all the time. And obviously your personality would share that you are very passionate about the community.
I believe it's like learning through the years. I agree with Bonnie in terms of, taking self-care a priority, because you can't, look after others if you're not well yourself. I share that with my team always and ensure that they're doing self-care throughout the day. In saying that, I think that throughout the years, having those boundaries and leaving the work at work, at night, it's very difficult in the work that we do. But I mean, it's taken me probably a number of years to be able to do that. And so now I do, I leave it at work and I go home to my family, and then the next day is a new day, and that's the most important thing, I think, is leaving the work at home. Although, sometimes it's difficult and you're working past 5, but then after that, you're leaving it at work, right? That's the most important thing for self-care. And yeah, that's basically it.
Great. And Steve, how do the chamber, you're traveling, you're all over Saskatchewan. How did you kind of keep some of those boundaries for yourself? Because it can be time consuming as well.
Yeah, and no question. And when you enjoy what you're doing, it doesn't feel like work as often. And when you're passionate about it, it's easy to spend hours and hours and days. I think you have to set those boundaries yourself, and then you have to give yourself permission. Nowadays, with cell phones and volunteer board members who will sometimes read your reports in the evenings and respond, you can sometimes reply to them, but you've got to train yourself to say, no, at 6 o'clock, that's it, I'm done. And train your board members that you're not going to be able to reply every night till 10 o'clock, because that's when they have the free time to do it. And if you don't do that, suddenly you're forgetting things, you're responding, you're not focused with your family, they're frustrated with it. And even when you respond to a call or an email in the evening, you may not remember what you've committed to and so on. So give yourself permission to shut down the laptop, the phone, whatever it is. And the other one is to teach your board or your colleagues that you're off and it's time to focus. And if you don't do that, I'll tell you what, you will pay the price in many, many ways, health or otherwise, home, life, whatever it happens to be, you will pay the price. So you've got to give yourself permission and then train people around you. And quite frankly, in a leadership role, if you're emailing your staff, one of the best things I learned technologically was that I can write an email later in the day or on a weekend if I was working, but I would delay its send time till Monday morning, 8 o'clock. So as far as the staff knew, I got up very early Monday morning and did some emails, but in fairness, I might have chosen to work over the weekend. And you can do that. I'm not saying you don't ever do that, but all I'm saying is don't make everybody else a slave to your commitment or bad habits.
Well, we're getting some great advice here, and I'm turning to our chat here, and we have Bayani who is looking for advice of when you're just starting your career that you would have. And Bayani, I just want to just jump in and just one nugget or one thing I wish I had learned when I was younger is to not be afraid to, like, if you see people that you think are really true inspirational leaders and you're looking and you want to go down the same career path as them, or is don't be afraid to kind of reach out to them and tell them. And you know, you don't need to kind of formally use the word mentor, but most people are going to be very flattered that a younger person is taking interest and feels that they've got some advice and some wisdom that they'd like to share. You know, that most people, you know, later in their careers are happy to kind of help so that you're not having the same mistakes in life that they've made, right? So don't be afraid to reach out to those people that, you know, for further advice or reflection. And, you know, what Steve said about having those boundaries, and everybody has kind of basically said the boundaries. Like I think look back and don't do the jobs of 2 or 3 people, because at the end of the day, you're actually not serving your organization well too, because when you leave, there's capacity issues, you know, and you're also going to be burnt out and not helping figure out what those boundaries are within reason, of course. But why don't we turn to Pam? Do you have, like, you know, like, so imagine you're an entry-level person, you're just starting your career. What's that one thing that you would suggest?
I'm just starting my career in what?
And you know, just you're looking at kind of you know, a career in the nonprofit sector and whatever kind of subsector you're looking at, but like, what's that one key nugget of information that you would say to that new employee?
I would think being resourceful with all the community organizations, agencies, policies and procedures with the ministry, I think is important. And yeah, being knowledgeable in those would be my advice.
Steve.
I would say get to know the people behind the program. Everybody, whether you agree with them, if it's a social services, a staff person, for example, you know, they have a life after 5 o'clock too, and getting to know them a little bit is useful. The other one is identify the rock stars early, the superstars early, and keep track of them. So even in my example, there's 2 guys that were at the First Nations University as student leaders, Thomas Benjo and Cadmus Delorme. A couple of young guys did great things there to help keep their university open. And I've kept track of them. And if you know them, they've done quite well and are huge community leaders now. But identify those rock stars early. Keep tabs of them. You don't have to have lunch with them every week. They don't have to become your best friend, but keep tabs on those people that are working, they're older than you or they're younger than you, because there's some point in your career you're going to want to say, listen, that person would have insight, or they're in a position to assist, or you're in a position to assist them. And you know they're good people, because you're going to meet a lot of people over your career. Keep tabs on the rock stars.
Bonnie's turn.
Well, I could say what everybody else has said, but I'd like to add that when you go into a new position, you find out exactly what your role is supposed to be. Find out the latitudes of that job and what you can do, and safely do. I know, and sometimes within a position that you might hold, there's the opportunities for you to create it the way you want it to be. And I was fortunate enough that when I lucked into the job here, I was able to create what it was that I would do, how I would function. And I was fortunate that I knew some people within social services and stuff like that, that helped me to be able to develop how I was going to function and carry on my relationship with social services and within government and stuff like that, like around the lobbying. Like, just make sure you know what, when they're talking boundaries, it's not just the boundaries of stopping work when you should, but what are the boundaries within the work that you can use to expand what it is that you're doing. So it does help to feed into your passion. Believe me, I didn't work for Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry. I was part of it. It was a passion. There was a sense of ownership by the staff who work here. It wasn't, as Steve has pointed out, it's not a job. I've started feeling guilty by referring to it as a job, because my previous experience of jobs was, man, can't wait till I'm 65 to retire, right? So for me, it was, this is the way I live. And I found it hard to retire from this and to walk away from it. But find out what role you can actually play and help build that organization to be what it can be. And do it safely, though, because you could lose your job if you overstep a boundary.
Donna, I know you likely have some really good advice for us as well.
You know, there's two things that I would speak to. I think one is be authentic. Be your true self, so people trust you. This is a sector that relies heavily on trust, and partnerships rely on trust. So be authentic to who you are and be trusting. The second one would be commit to lifelong learning. This is not something you get a degree or get some education and you're done. Commit to lifelong learning, like this session, like the sessions that you continue to put on, Lynn, through the Toolkit series. Commit to new ways to do business, new partnerships. This is kind of where you learn about them. So commit to lifelong learning. That's it.
Again,
Lynn, may I
great
just
advice.
add, I just wanted to reiterate the point you made, Lynn, because it's so critical that, and it's somebody's got a project that they think you should be part of. And what it really means is, in some cases, not all, but some cases, it's a project that you're going to get to do most of the work on. They're going to take some of the glory, but you get to do the heavy slugging. Or they need a check mark that says we've got the University of Regina in, or we've got the poverty organizations in. It's a check mark. Make sure that as a young person, you think, oh my gosh, this is really good for my ego because they're inviting me to sit on this committee or this board or do this project with them or whatever. Make sure, don't be negatively or overly hesitant, but make sure that you know exactly what you're going into. Otherwise, what you think is a first of all, it was so great that somebody from the government called me and asked me to be part of this thing, when really it's either a check mark to have your organizations involved, or truly it's for you to do all the work. Learn quickly to know the difference.
That's a great point, Steve. Someone recently shared this line with me, that if somebody is coming up with a project that's interesting and they want you to do something, the line they suggested I use was, "What a great idea." I assume that you have some resources that you could add to this project. We're under capacity right now, but this sounds like a great project to pursue if there were to be some resources that were directed to us to be a part of it. And then usually there's stunned silence and they say, no. But you've been very positive and you haven't nixed their idea, but you've really gotten the point across that, you can't do everything. And, just that, getting back to that, one of my first associate deans at the university, when she was doing a performance review with me, she said, Lynn, you have to kind of decide on, instead of doing 10 projects that are all potentially really good, pick the one or two and really focus your energies on that, because you're dividing your attention to too many things, right? So that's what I would say to younger people is just figure out what it is that you can do really well and get into that passion. What are you gonna love doing? Right. So are there any other kind of questions that I don't see any in the chat box, but anybody else or any last kind of pearls of wisdom that any of our panelists might have?
I think I would just say one more thing, and I think I like the idea that find a mentor early on in your career. Find a mentor that you can connect with and just keep in touch with them, whether you connect with them through LinkedIn and just ask for coffee or a virtual meeting, just to ask some basic questions and then keep connected with them. I recently connected with a friend who didn't know how to get back involved with the nonprofit sector, and I recommended the Toolkit series and the department that oversees it. And, she had done a lot of research but didn't know about it. So connecting with people and finding a mentor would be one that I think is important early on in your career for sure.
Now it's Bonnie here. I think maybe reach out to organizations that you might be interested in knowing who they are and if there's connections between you. The most that can happen is the organizations would say, no, there's not enough commonality between us or whatever, right? But at least you have a nice conversation with somebody else and you learn a little more about the different organizations that are actually in our community. So it's all about making connections and moving forward with the work that you're doing. And the thing is we're all doing a piece here and a piece there. And until we start taking all of our pieces and putting them together, we're not going to have that quilt of life where it'll cover and keep us warm in this community. So we need to start making those patchwork connections between all of our organizations so that we can build that stronger and warmer community. That's it.
Well, seeing no more further questions, unless anybody else has anything else to say, I think we're coming fairly close to the end of our session together. I am going to be sending an email out after this, which includes a copy of the Zoom recording, which please feel free to share with any of your colleagues that were not able to join us today, or if you're something you want to look at again. I will also include in this email copies of the emails to of all of our panelists, if that's okay with everyone. We invite all of you to not be shy. If you do have questions and connections, that's the biggest thing I think I've learned in the last little while too, is just the relationship building, taking that time to get to know people and see how you can help each other out. Because as many of our panelists said, that we all have some kind of a resource that we may be able to share with somebody else. And if we work together, as we're trying to do with through these toolkit sessions and others, a big focus of what we're trying to do is to build community. So we're all working together to just make our city, our province, our communities a little bit better for everybody. And we can't do it on our own, recognizing that these little steps that we're taking are all in the right direction. So I would just like to thank our panelists today for joining us with all this great wisdom. And honestly, if you have ideas for further professional development that we should do with this toolkit series, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We want to make sure that what we offer is community driven, that it's not just kind of something that we think of in the ivory tower at the university, but this is something that is helpful to the people like yourselves that are just doing such great work. So with that, have a great day, and please watch out for that email, which I will also include information about our next toolkit, which is coming up on October 27th on how to identify and address microaggressions so that you can be do a better job in fighting some of the incipient issues of racism in our society. So with that, have a wonderful day, and thank you very much, folks.
Thanks, Lynn.